what is all this? We're in the middle of what the Jewish holiday called Passover. And Passover officially ends tomorrow. But we are going to pause from our series about the Davidic promises of God. And we're going to look at this promise that is commemorized in this ceremony here. And this is called the Passover Seder. Now, Seder is a Hebrew word that just means order. And we'll get into why that's important in a minute. But for about 17 years now, my family has been practicing the Passover Seder, and I'll tell you why. We took a moment and just kind of reflected on our lives and reflected on, as a family, what traditions are we teaching our children? What are they going to grow up thinking? Like, every year we do this, and this. And as I looked, it was fun things that I don't hate, but had me questioning, like Easter. We had Easter egg hunts, and we had chocolate candy. Most of our traditions revolve around giving kids candy somehow, and they like that. And so we were looking at that, and then we looked at Halloween, candy. We had Thanksgiving, which is great. Stuffing, which is like grown-up candy, right? And then Christmas, which is we give them gifts and candy. It's like a dentist's nightmare, like all of our traditions, right? And we wanted to establish a tradition. Oh, we even had a tradition where I felt bad for my sons. Both of my sons have birthdays around Christmas, and if your birthday's around Christmas, you know the combo gift. Right? You know we're not going to have a party for you until Christmas Eve because everyone will be here. And you don't really, it's like, anyway, I don't want to bring up your childhood trauma. So we took our kids' birthdays and kind of blended them and went in June, and we we invented a holiday called Summer Holiday on June 27th. And it was like, now June 27th every year, it's a joke, Summer Holiday, but for a few years we actually tried to institute a holiday. And believe me, it was very intricate. It had to do with the Bee Gees, Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and it had to do with the summer holiday toucan who would sniff up paprika and sneeze up gifts. And I had to clarify, there was no LSD done in this whole process. It was just the creative mind of me and my children untethered. But I want to ask, like, what traditions do you have in your family? What did you grow up with that was a tradition, and what did it teach you? Just think about that for a minute. We all grew up with some traditions. Even if doing nothing was your regular thing when everyone else was doing something, that was a tradition. Throughout Jewish history, they carry on these festivals. And these festivals are all have symbolic traditions involved in them, and this one is Passover, the festival of the Passover, which is a week-long celebration. And the inaugural event of the Passover is the Seder. This is the commemorative meal. The meal has every element has symbolic representation, so every element means something. Every part of the meal means something. And it's all mapped out in the book of Exodus, where God's people are instructed with great detail that for every generation you are to teach your children the story of the Exodus. And if you haven't heard, the story of the Exodus is the story about how God saved his people and pulled them out of slavery under the Egyptians. And there were very specific things that they were to do to identify themselves as God's people. One of them is they were to sacrifice a lamb and take the blood of the lamb, and with this hyssop, they were to, over their doorpost, put the blood of the lamb. So when God was bringing a curse upon the Egyptians, almost as a cover for God's people to be set free, to be able to run free, it would pass over their home, and they would be spared. And that the Hebrew word for that is Pesach. So this holiday in Jewish is called Pesach, and it literally just means Passover. So we have this tradition that is told and it says, in this very specific ceremonial meal, with these specific elements, tell this to your children for generations until the end of the age. So they're instructed to teach their children this till the end of the age. And when I think of why, it can't just be just to teach them a history lesson. And when you look at what the essence of this is, and we're going to get into the details here, but here's the punchline. The essence of this meal is to have a shared experience with your children for generations to come that teaches them a few things about life and God. And one of those things that it teaches them is that there is suffering in this world and that life is hard. And then it teaches them that God is a God of promises and redemption and restoration, and there is hope, but there still is difficulty in this world. And when I think of what's one of the most important things we can equip our children with to be resilient in this world, is that there is suffering. There is hardship in this world. We will face it. And anyone who's been alive knows that's true, right? But I think for so long, I don't know who and when and where, but the gospel message got marketed and pitched into this, hey, you once were broken and you suffered. Now you accept Jesus and everything's going to be okay. Because Jesus takes away your suffering. And that's just not the gospel. And I think that's why we have a whole bunch of people now who are attending churches and trying to find hope, but every time they experience suffering, they question the very existence of God. They question the validity of the gospel, and I hear it all the time. I hear it all the time. When someone questions God's goodness or his existence, or even the existence of goodness at all because of their own lived experience, and they don't know how to handle it. So I think one of the greatest things we can teach our children is that, yes, there is struggle and suffering in this world, and you will face it. And the good news is God is with you in the struggle. That's the other message of this Passover. And as he's with you in the struggle, it makes you stronger than the struggle. So yes, there is suffering in this world, but you are stronger than the suffering. You can sustain, you can redeem, not on your own strength, but on the strength of Christ in you. That's one of the greatest things we can teach generations to come. Because then when they experience life, they'll be resilient. They won't crumble because they'll know. Now, each element of this Passover Seder has something to do with that story. So, the first one that we're going to talk about is called the matzah tash. Now, this is just a linen cloth that I have here, and with the traditional Jewish matzah tash, it's actually a linen cloth. It has to be linen, but it's sewn into three parts. There's an outer part, an inner part, and a middle part. It's this triune nature of this body, the bread, right? Now, this is fascinating to me. There isn't agreement among Jewish rabbis as to why there are three parts. Now, oftentimes with the whole Seder meal, if you try to ask why something is there, here's the reason that they give. The question would be, why are there three parts to the matzah tash? And the answer would be, so the children will ask, why are there three parts to the matzah tash? Right? And because Judaism has often been called a religion of questions, not a religion of answers. And I like that. And it's a little more honest. Because that's kind of all we all can come up with, right? None of us can contain all knowledge that is God. Now, if you're worried about cultural appropriation that we're doing here, we're taking a Jewish tradition that's been around thousands of years and we're appropriating it to read Jesus Christ into it. I just want to, if you haven't figured this out yet, Christianity, that's kind of our thing. We culturally appropriated Judaism. It's what it is, right? This long-standing religion hoping for a Messiah to come. We believe Jesus is the Messiah to come. Many of them don't. Many of them do believe that Jesus is that Messiah. And those of us, the whole message of the gospel of Paul is that we as non-Jews are grafted into the vine. We're welcomed to culturally appropriate. So, good job. I'm proud of you. So with the matzah tash, though, there's 3 parts. Each part has a different piece of this unleavened bread. The unleavened bread represents the bread that what they were told to make because they had to prepare this in a hurry. They didn't have time for the bread to rise. So it's this unleavenedness. And now leaven is also throughout the Bible, and even outside of the Bible, throughout history, leaven for some reason represents sin. So the idea of sin being removed from your life, or sin being able to fester and grow, and kind of what a leavening agent would do in bread. So the unleavened bread, there's 3 pieces, and then there's a middle piece of the unleavened bread. The middle piece is called the afikomen. So what they would do is that usually the patriarch of the family that's leading the Seder meal would hold up the matzah tash with all 3 pieces of bread, and then he would take out the middle matzah. And the middle matzah is called the afikomen, which is a Greek word, and it means that which comes later. And what he would do is he would take the afikomen, the middle part of this 3-part bread, and he would break it, right? And he would put half back in the matzah tash and take the other half of this afikomen, and he would wrap it in linen. It has to be linen. Wrap it in linen. Now, interesting thing about how this matzah is prepared, specifically defined in Exodus, because it's unleavened, it's flat, it has to have piercings. The piercings were believed to stop it from rising, but it has to have piercings. And it has to have these stripes. And then the way it's baked, it will brown in certain areas, and so it's bruised. Now, that may sound familiar of a prophecy about the Messiah to come. Well, he will be pierced for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities. Right? And then we see in the gospel accounts of Jesus' crucifixion, it seemed very random to you if you first read this and said, why was his side pierced? Why was he on the cross and they pierced his side and water flowed out? What a random specific thing, unless you knew that the afikomen had been pierced for thousands of years on this yearly traditional meal. And you would say, oh, he was pierced for our transgressions. So the afikomen to us represents Jesus Christ. And so what they do is they take this afikomen, the patriarch would wrap it, and then he would go and hide it or bury it. That is to come later, is what afikomen means. He would go bury it. And then later in the ceremony of the Seder meal, the children would run around and try to find the afikomen. And whoever found it would bring it back to the patriarch who was leading the Seder, and they would say, you found the afikomen that was hidden, and they would give them a reward, usually cash, which is what we're going to do for our Seder. Rolling in the coinage. That is going to be that is the ceremony. Do you see the parallels here? And the thing is, there is no theological explanation that is agreed upon with rabbis as to what specifically all this means. It's fascinating to me. But for us, we see Jesus in this whole thing. So that's the afikomen, the matzah tash, and the matzah, pointing to Jesus. The other elements we're going to talk about today are the 4 cups of wine. Throughout the ceremony, there are 4 cups of wine. Each one of them represents something. Okay? Each one of them. The reason why this is significant to us, let me kind of draw this parallel now. We take communion every week as a church. Now, when Jesus instituted this communion, it was around a table with his disciples. And the meal they were at, was a Passover Seder. It wasn't just a random meal. This was at the time of Passover. They were having their Seder. They were doing this ceremonial meal. And when Jesus came and he took the afikomen and he broke it, you know what Jesus didn't do? He didn't wrap it in linen and hide it. Jesus repurposed this. He took the afikomen and he broke it. And he said, this is not going to go be hidden. It's here. That which is to come later is here now. Afikomen is here. I am the afikomen. So take, and he gave it to them and he said, eat. This is my body that was broken for you. He said, this breaking that happened, it's for you. And the afikomen represents that. Isn't that beautiful? So Jesus repurposed this ceremony to teach the Jewish people that he is the one that is to come later. Each glass of wine has a different meaning based on Exodus chapter 6, verses 6 through 7. There's these promises that God makes to his people as he's calling them out. He says, I will bring you out, I will free you, I will redeem you, and I will take you as my own people. And each one of these cups represents one of those. The significant one to us right here for today is the third cup. This is the cup that says, I will redeem you, the cup of redemption. This is the cup that Jesus, when he took this cup, typically they would do is there's a blessing that they would recite, Baruch atah Adonai, and they would call upon God's blessing of redemption, and then everyone would take their cup and they would drink their cup of wine. But what Jesus did is he took the cup, this cup of redemption, and once again he repurposed it. And he says, take, drink. This is my blood that was shed for you. Like this, he says, do this in remembrance of me. So he's taking this cup of redemption, he's saying, I am the redemption. That declaration would have blown their minds. That's not what you do. You don't, Jesus, you're a Jewish rabbi, you know this. You don't pass this around. We don't all drink. No, we all drink our own. No. This is my blood. My blood is the redemption. That's the third cup. Now, the next element is the Passover lamb and the blood that was applied to the doorpost that's integrated into the cups. John the Baptist identified Jesus as the Passover lamb. What I'm teaching you here is the way the New Testament authors interpreted the Passover and the Last Supper. John, Peter, Paul, the gospel writers, they all read what Jesus did at that Last Supper and the existence of Jesus. They read him into the Passover celebration. Jesus was crucified during the Passover festival. We see that in Matthew 26, Mark 14, Luke 22, John 13. At the same time the Passover lambs were being sacrificed was the same time Jesus was crucified. We see that in John 19. This underscores Jesus' role as the Passover lamb, the lamb that was sacrificed so his blood could be applied to the homes of the families so the curse would pass over them. Jesus is the Passover lamb. Now, there's a couple more elements of the Seder that are sprinkled throughout. One of them, this is called maror. Does that look familiar? It is horseradish. The whole point of the maror is to bring you to tears. And sometimes when Heather prepares the maror, she's like, challenge accepted. And it's the hottest thing. She made it really hot one year. And we were all just gagging, and it was abuse. But the point is, you take this and you put it on, here, I'll do it. you put it on the afikomen, and you're supposed to eat it. And the thing is, it does well up tears. Now this right here is called a Haggadah. A Haggadah is the order of the Seder. This is a Jewish Haggadah, so if you notice, it reads right to left, like the Hebrew language. They have Messianic Haggadah, but if you ask this, how much maror, or horseradish, are you to put on the bread, on the matzah, it will say enough to bring you to tears. Because the point of it is that we have an experience in this meal where we identify that suffering exists. In this life, we will have trouble. So that's one element that indicates the suffering. The other part, there's another part called the kepas, and this is where we take we use parsley, and you dip it in salt water, and that's supposed to represent the tears of the people who had to leave their home, and the tears of the Egyptians who suffered the curse. Now, there are 10 plagues brought upon the Egyptian people. And there's an element of the Seder where the Jewish people are to remember and face the fact that their freedom involved those who were oppressing them and treating them poorly, suffering. And so they embrace that this joy that we experience with freedom, there was suffering. And so there's an element where you dip your finger in the wine and you go through the 10 plagues and you drop a drop of wine on the plate for each plague as you remember it. And everybody says it. It's locusts and it's frogs, right? And it's 10, it goes through 10 different, so you have 10 drops on your plate. The idea is the plagues take 10 drops of joy out of the cup. So the suffering of the plagues costs something, right? And we have to face that. Yet, there's still an abundance of joy. And it cost us something. So do you see, I see this as, of course, God would want us to teach this to all generations. God would want us to teach our children to be resilient in this world. God would want us to teach our children that when you are facing suffering, it doesn't mean that God is absent. It means that God is with you in the midst of your suffering. We have Psalm 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why will I fear no evil? For my God is with me. It doesn't say when I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, God will pull me out of the valley of shadow of death and put me in Hawaii where I want to be. There is no gospel like that. When we are in the midst of suffering, God is with us, and that is a blessing. This is what the teaching of Jesus, when he talks about the Beatitudes, are. Blessed are you when you go through trials of many kinds, because God is with you. Blessed are you when you suffer, because God, you will feel and know the presence of God. So I hope you see the value as adults thinking about the next generation. This is something that we need to teach. We need to teach our children to be resilient. And you can see the silliness of some false doctrines that teach this happy, clappy Jesus that, hey, you used to have a past and it used to be suffering, but now you have Jesus and it's all joy. Jesus died on the cross so you could just smile all the time. But there is a deep, deep resolve that we can have when we see suffering as part of the experience of life and we don't give up hope. That's the Passover. And do you see the good news in the Passover? If we get into more of the details, you'll see Jesus is all over it. And someone may ask, like, why? How come, like for me, this is so clearly the triune part of God in the Matzah, the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Spirit. It's so clear. And the middle one is the Son, and he's broken, and he's bruised, and he's pierced, and he's hidden, and he's recovered and restored, and there's a celebration and a reward, and because he's found. And this cup of redemption, like throughout, even beyond Jewish history, ancient history, the idea of eating or drinking something ceremonially means that this very thing I'm going to embody. It's like you are what you eat, right? It's whatever I am ceremonially consuming, I am going to embody this, right? And so when Jesus says, take, eat, and drink, he's saying, make this who you are. This is with you. Jesus is with you wherever you are, wherever you go. This is where Jesus replaces the need for a temple. He replaces the need for sacrifice. He replaces the need. This is where he says, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. And he is with us. My hope and prayer with this today, this Family Sunday, is that parents and grandparents, let's teach our children the joy of the love of Jesus that exists in the midst of our struggles. And I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of time trying to hide my children from my own struggles and shelter them from the pressures of this world. And there's some wisdom in that, age-appropriate wisdom. But we gotta teach them that the suffering in this world is part of existence. But with Jesus, they're made strong. They can sustain. And if we take Jesus at his word that he has transformed us and he's making us into people that can be a blessing, you will find that the struggles and suffering of this world you'll see as this opportunity to bring light, this opportunity to bring blessing and to fill your purpose. When we can face suffering and say, yes, yet there is still hope, we bring light, we bring hope, and that's what we need to pass on to the next generation. Let me pray. Father, thank you so much for this beautiful tradition that's been handed down generation to generation to generation. And I pray that as we embrace what this means today, as we acknowledge our life and say there's struggles, and God, those struggles are self-imposed. Those struggles are imposed upon us. Those struggles are because of relationships that are broken. Those struggles are because of fear and insecurity. Those struggles are for many reasons because we live in a fallen world. But God, which each one of these cups represent your promises. You will deliver us. You'll bring us out of our oppression and our suffering and our sin. You will set us free. You will redeem us, and you will restore us to our right place as your people. And we see right now, looking back, that Jesus Christ, you accomplished all these things with your birth, your life, your teaching, your death, your burial, and your resurrection. You fulfill all of these promises. So we receive this new covenant from you today.